When you sit down to play Magic the Gathering, you start by shuffling your deck. Shuffling is meant to randomize your deck, which introduces an element of luck or chance to the game. Shuffling is often then followed by a cut, often by your opponent, to ensure that you, the shuffler, haven't manipulated the cards and therefore the outcome of the game. Many games lean into shuffling to introduce an element of uncertainty and randomness, which means there's a mix of skill and luck needed to win. I recently played a Commander game where there were 9 lands in a row on top of my deck, even though I'm absolutely sure I shuffled extensively before the game. There's also been critical moments when I've been playing on Arena where it appears like I haven't put a single land into my deck. So I'm going to sneakily make this another video where I get to use my physics degree, and let's talk about shuffling and randomness in Magic the Gathering. There are different types of randomness. And when we think of Magic the Gathering, we can see there's mechanical randomness introduced to the game through the mechanics of the game. Shuffling your deck and cards that cause you to shuffle your deck, as well as the random draws seen in the game, are examples of that mechanical randomness. The idea is that while we're inputting something, generally you know the cards in your deck. Generally, when we draw a card, we don't know what the output will be. The official rules in Magic say, shuffle. To shuffle a library or a face-down pile of cards, randomize the cards within it so that no player knows their order. There are, of course, ways that we can be more sure of the output. Mechanics like scrying can help us manipulate our deck so that we do know more about the output or what we'll draw. And while you can attempt to stack the deck in your favor by building your deck to the best of your ability, with the best possible ratio of lands to spells, and with a stellar mana curve, you ultimately don't really have control of what you will draw. And if you happen to draw the perfect card, it'll still feel incredibly lucky. So how do we know if we fairly shuffled our deck? With 99 cards in your commander deck, your commander gets to hang out in the command zone. The possible ways your deck could be ordered is 99 factorial, which is essentially about this huge number here, or over 933 quinquagintillion, or 933 with 153 zeros after it. So there's essentially an unlimited number of ways that you could order your commander deck, but many of these orders are unplayable. You need a mixture of lands and spells to make your deck work. You're relying on the fact that shuffling your deck will randomize the order of the deck, such that you have a probability of drawing the ratio of lands and spells you need. The idea in Magic is that you have resource cards and action cards. This is similar to other deck building games like Dominion, where Dominion has 3 different types of cards, although Dominion's much more explicit about it. They've got points cards, resource cards, and action cards. In Magic, while they don't say it directly, there are 2 different flavors, and there are so many different interesting game mechanics built on top of them. You have the cards that give you mana. Really, lands are what we're talking about here, but mana rocks are a mixture of a resource and an action card. And actions are anything you can spend mana on. And your deck needs to have a combination of both of these things to function. You can't just have resource cards, or you can't do anything. And you can't just have action cards, or you can't cast any of them. Okay, stop. Don't worry. Someone has already shown me the Oops, All Lands deck. I've seen it. It's a rare exception. But also I would argue it's not really an exception. That deck has a commander, which is not a land, so I would argue that it doesn't even count since it has an action card. And furthermore, it plays a bunch of utility lands, which also mix actions into your resource card pool. So again, it doesn't count. It's an interesting corner case though. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Many other card games don't have this distinction between resource and action. Take Lorcana, for instance. It exclusively has action cards, which you can choose to play as a resource card rather than an action. So shuffling here is maybe less pivotal because nearly every card in your hand can function as either a resource or an action, although the card does need to have an inkwell around the casting cost in order for it to be used as a resource. Or look at Hearthstone and Marvel Snap. These games provide an external resource, which you can get more of every turn, that you can use to spend on cards in your hand, which are all essentially action cards. Magic is diametrically opposed to those systems, and therefore relies much more on the mechanical randomness of shuffling. Anyway, How does one shuffle a commander deck? Personally, I have smaller hands and I always really struggle with this. The most common way that people shuffle their Magic decks is with a variation of a riffle shuffle. People aren't bending their cards and fridging them, but the process of taking half of the deck in each hand and then placing the corners together, then pushing the halves together and interweaving the cards into one pile is considered riffle shuffling. You'll see a modified version of this shuffling method at casinos, where they set both piles face down on the table to minimize the chance of someone seeing the cards on the bottom and gaining additional information about the order of the deck. There's a mathematical model for this type of shuffling called the Gilbert-Shannon-Reeds model. The Gilbert-Shannon-Reeds model is a probability distribution of riffle shuffling permutations that is a model that fits experimentally observed outcomes of human shuffling. This flavor of shuffling is generally the best way to shuffle your Magic deck to truly randomize the cards. But there are other ways that people shuffle. Some ways more fair than others. Let's chat about 2 ways that you may want to shuffle your deck because they feel like they're shuffling it, but where you're really just ordering your deck. You may have heard the term mana weaving. Mana weaving is when you take all the lands from your deck and distribute them evenly throughout the rest of your deck. This feels like you're distributing the lands randomly through your deck, but this isn't really randomizing the deck. By distributing the lands throughout the deck, you know that the lands are spread out throughout the deck. You therefore have additional information about the location of the cards in your deck. This decreases the randomness of your draws. I've also seen people pile shuffle, and I know I sometimes like to pile shuffle my cards right after I've organized a deck to upgrade it or look at the cards in my deck. When you're pile shuffling cards, you're dealing cards into a number of piles, typically an odd number. Then the piles are stacked on top of each other or mixed together. The trick with pile shuffling, though, is that it's deterministic and does not randomize the cards at all. When you're pile shuffling, you're ensuring that cards that were next to each other are now separated. And since you ensure those cards are separated, you're not only not randomizing your deck, you also have additional knowledge about the order of your deck, since you know that cards that were previously next to each other are no longer next to each other. Some variations on the pile shuffle method attempt to make it slightly random by dealing the cards onto piles in a random order. But even then, you should definitely make sure you riffle shuffle your deck afterwards to truly randomize the deck. Okay, one last way of shuffling that I think is fun, and I've seen people use this strategy. It's something called the corgi shuffle. Corgi shuffling is also sometimes called the beginner shuffle, washing the cards, or smooshing. This is where someone spreads the cards out face down on the table and slides them around over and over and over again until they're finally smooshed together into a single pile. Statistically, random shuffling is achieved after about a minute of smooshing. Although, mechanical randomness is not the only randomness that we see in Magic the Gathering. There's also randomness introduced by the other players at the table. This is especially noticeable in multiplayer formats such as Commander or Oathbreaker. Randomness can be introduced through hidden information and simultaneous decision making, as well as adversarial targeting, wherein each player can choose who they want to attack or target. That's a whole nother conversation, albeit a fun conversation. We'll have to have it sometime. I know that I've definitely blamed my performance in a game on my shuffling before, and I think it's really interesting to consider the role of randomness and luck in Magic the Gathering. But if you want to chat more about luck and randomness in board games in general, I have a whole video on that right here.